good to see how many of you remembered to change your clocks. It'll be interesting to see who comes in at 10:30. But give yourselves a pat on the back. I'm always happy for the opportunity to tell you what I've been thinking about. Hashtag Dharma Talk. Yesterday, my husband and I went to La Jolla Playhouse to see the premiere performance of Diana. This is not Diana Ross. It's the other Diana, Princess of Wales. And I wasn't sure, I knew that this was coming. I wasn't sure, what is there? Why do I want to go see something about Diana? After I saw it, I was truly amazed at how touched I was by her story. And then I thought about, there was a Dharma message there. As we practice, we know Dharma is everywhere. And once you realize that, all your experiences, everything you see, is through the vision of Dharma. So I saw this musical, and again, it's for an American audience. Some of it's way over the top, but the message was there. The Dharma message was about expectations, that we all expected the fairy princess, the beautiful Diana, would be taken off to the castle by her Prince Charles and live happily ever after. And we know that that's not what happened. The other Dharma lesson was taking sides, being judgmental. How many were for Diana? How many, it's us against them being Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles. So there we were, dividing, taking sides, Dharma lesson. And then for Diana, it was finding her true self, finding her truth, realizing her expectations were not going to be realized. And that's another Dharma lesson, finding our true self. Who are we? How do we make sense of our life? And we know how it ended. But before it ended, she did a lot of good. She brought attention to HIV/AIDS and other charities and made that public. So it's not how many years you live, but how you live your years. So that was the Dharma message. And I really don't want to talk about Diana, but Diana kind of helps me into what I want to talk about, and that's women. March is Women's History Month. Friday was International Women's Day. And so the question I had was, what does it take to become a part of history if you're a woman? Diana has become a part of history. In the restroom line with many ladies, I overheard them talking about how much they loved her. 22 years later, there was a stand selling memorabilia, t-shirts and cups, mugs, and people were standing in line to buy that. So even though she's no longer here, her history is still alive. Who she was is still alive. I want to talk about women's history. The subject is way too broad for the time I'm allotted. So what I want to do is narrow it down. Oh, and I have to tell you, I'm stepping out on that PowerPoint limb. So bear with me. So, do I point down here? Or does it matter?
Yeah, you point down here.
Okay, I got this. Maybe. Aha. Okay. So I want to talk about Buddhist women in history. And again, the category is too broad. We need to have a BEC class on Buddhist women and their contribution to to Buddhism, because we don't get to talk about women that much. And so this was perfect for me, because I've actually wanted to talk about this for at least a couple of years. And so now I have the opportunity. So we're only going to talk about a few. And like I say, there are many more. So the first one, it all begins with Maya, Siddhartha's mother. And so she gives birth to Siddhartha in Lumbini Garden, excuse me. And 7 days later, she dies. So the next person is her sister, Pajapati, I'll get it, who takes Siddhartha as her own son and raises him. And Pajapata does something very exceptional as well. And it tells a little bit about it on the slide, but I have a little bit more information that I want to give you about Pajapati and how she got Maha attached to her name. Mahapajapati became the founder of the first order of Buddhist nuns, 500 women. And 500 is one of those numbers used to indicate a lot of people. Nobody actually counted the women to say there was 500, but there were a lot of women who shaved their heads, put on saffron robes of the ordained, and walked 115 miles on bare feet to beg the Buddha to allow them to be ordained. Yes, women were marching for equality in the Buddha's days. They were determined not to take no for an answer. This was a bold undertaking given the subordinate role of women in India during this time. Mahapajapati, as a female activist, showed great courage, perseverance, and faith to pursue the right for women to engage in religious practices the same as men. Of course, they weren't able to accomplish that on their own merits. So the Buddha's disciple, Ananda, who was very sympathetic with the women and their cause. So Ananda was the one who presented their case to the Buddha. And eventually, the Buddha was able to allow women to leave their homes as men did and live under the Dharma and the discipline of the Tathagata. However, women could only do so with restrictions that still made them subordinate to monks. There were additional precepts and restrictions that even today can be found governing nuns in many places around the world. We found out about this when we read some time ago, In Search of the Buddha's Daughters. This was a book written by Christine Toomey, and she studied nuns in different places in the world, and they were still struggling. I will throw in, there is one group of nuns today that do not struggle, and those are the nuns that follow Thich Nhat Hanh. Those nuns have equality in all areas with the monks. So that is not true for all orders, but at least for that one. Some of the 500 women who followed Mahapajapati write about their lives in a book. Time to move forward. Okay. There we go. In a book, this is the book we're reading for our book club this month. The First Buddhist Women, Poems and Stories of Awakening by Susan Murcott. And these writings were composed during the Buddhist time. So they are the earliest writings by women. And they are composed in what's called the Theravada canon. Tara means, as you can see, older women or wise women, as I like to think of them. And we know what Gatha is, we just sang one. So the Theravada are the poems of wise women on early Buddhism. And this was the group that Mahapajapati formed the first group of nuns, and it was their writing. So who were these women, and why did they want to leave their homes and become homeless nuns? Siddhartha Gautama, in addition to leaving his wife and child behind, left a large harem. The women were left without a male protector. And in this time in India, a woman needed to have a male to take care of her, in other words. So when Siddhartha left, they had lost their protector, and so what were they to do? And they found comfort in following Mahapajapati on her effort to practice Buddhism. Basically, they were women who sought comfort and support from this organized group. Mahapajapati served as a wise role model, and in one source I read, she is considered the mother of Buddhism. So I don't want to talk too much about the book, but what they wrote about, let's see if I'm ready to go. Nope, not that one yet. I told you this is a work in progress. Just be patient with me, okay? Okay. I guess my point was, I would like to encourage you to read the book of these early writers. What they wrote about was their life, and they wrote about what Buddhism meant to them. So this is really documentation in the earliest form of the role that women were playing other than being subordinate to men. Okay, so we are ready for the next one. The next picture is one of a mythological figure, not a real person, but an important person, because she's a female bodhisattva. So, how did I get back there? Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Am I? What's happening, Sandy? Okay, we did that one. Okay. There she is. You know who that is? Okay, Kana. And so, she's the Bodhisattva of compassion. She has other names, Avalokiteshvara. She's also known as Kuan Yin in China. She's the Bodhisattva who hears the cries of the world. She took a vow that she would not become a Buddha until all sentient beings are free from samsara's ocean. Kuan Yin, or Kanaan, is said to have been born from a ray of light issuing from Amitabha or Amida Buddha's right eye. And she is sometimes seen as a companion of Amida Buddha. Compassion is the prime means of destroying all clinging to delusory selfhood. Kanaan is not a real person, but she is revered And she has all these arms and all these heads. Sometimes you see her with lots of ears, but this is representative of that she's hearing the cries, the suffering of everyone. There's another picture I want to show you, though, I think. There it is. I'm on track again. This is actually Kanan's temple in Kyoto. And it's a very serene, lovely picture of her, and I particularly like this depiction of her for another reason that I'll mention in a bit. Okay. Okay, this is the reason that this particular one seems to be important. Kanan becomes an important figure in a dream that Shinran had, in which she appears in the guise of a priest dressed in white robes, seated on a giant lotus flower pedestal. This dream led Shinran to find it acceptable to marry, once he had left Mount Hiei, his wife Ashini, who I will talk about later, also had a dream in which Shinran was revealed to her to be the Bodhisattva Kanan. Okay, let's talk about Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. And this is one of my favorites, Ishini. One of the most important women in Jodo Shinshu is Ishini, the wife of Shinran Shonin, the founder of our practice. There's not nearly enough attention brought to her, probably because early Japan was a patriarchal society. And the comments from here on, I would like to credit James C. Dobbins for his excellent book, Letters of the Non-Ishini, as my resource for finding out so much about her. And you'll see the way she's dressed, she does appear to be a nun, but she never practiced as a nun. There are reasons why she wore that attire, and I'll try to remember to mention it when I get to her daughter. Ishini's life and importance have been obscured by that of her husband, Shinran. Ishini was born in 1182, probably in Echigo province, along the desolate Japan Sea. Her family were aristocrats who owned land and servants. Therefore, she was well acquainted with the customs and language of the aristocracy. The details about how she met and married Shinran are unclear. In economic circumstances, Ishini, her financial assets were clearly necessary in supporting the family, while Shinran traveled the land spreading the Nimbutsu practice among the laity. Shinran was from Shinran was from the lower ranks of the aristocracy, and his family had fallen on hard times. This was an influence on him becoming a monk as a child, so we think. Throughout their marriage, they were devoted to each other, even though in later years they would live apart. Shinran would return to Kyoto to continue his doctrinal writings. Ishini returned to Echigo to manage a parcel of land she inherited from her family. This property yielded enough income to support her, her children, and her many servants. She gave birth to 6 children and had several grandchildren whom she adored. She lived a comfortable but not extravagant life and was still able to manage her affairs even at the age of 80. She lived in Ichigo until her death at 87. 3 VBT members and I traveled with a group to Japan in 2015 to attend the accession of the 25th head priest of our mother temple. While in Japan, our tour took us to Ichigo to visit the small and beautiful temple and museum that keeps, I guess I should change this. Okay, yeah, that's right. That keeps her memory alive. This is her temple, and if I can remember what Sandy said, there. Right there is a Shini. Here is Shinyon. And I was just so inspired and impressed to see her on a scroll on a Naijin. In the museum, her letters can be viewed under glass, but no pictures can be taken. She wrote many letters, as I'll talk about her letters a little more, and that's the title of Dobbin's book, The Letters of the Nun Ishini. To actually see her letters in her handwriting was an amazing experience. On entering her temple, it was an inspiration to see displayed, as I said, a scroll of her on the left and Shinran on the right. Only 2 other times did I see a scroll of a Shini in a temple. In both cases, the scrolls were placed in an alcove next to the altar, but not on it. What is believed to be her gravestone has been unearthed and sits on the temple grounds. Uh-oh, it's too much. There it is. The day we visited, there was hard rain. There was hard rain, there was hail, there was thunder. So this picture is blurry. You can see the rain. That's why it looks blurry. But this is sad to be her gravestone that they uncovered, that somehow in digging they found this. And so it sits on the grounds of her temple. Little would be known about Ishini had she not written letters to her daughter, Kakushini, who was living in Kyoto at the time. In 1921, a cache of several pages of writings were found in the archives of the Nishi-Hongan-ji temple in Kyoto. Based on translation, some of the pages were combined into 10 letters. They were published 2 years later in photographic facsimile and printed edition. Ishini wrote the letters over the last decade and a half of her life while she was living in Ichigo. The letters were very descriptive of medieval life in Japan. She wrote reminiscence of Shinran's life, religious testimony, accounts of dreams, descriptions of famine and sickness, comments about servants, thank you notes, complaints of old age, reflections on death and the next life. Her letters suggest that she was an assertive, sophisticated, and independent woman. She took great interest in her children and grandchildren and speaks about them in some of her letters to Kakushini. According to Dobbins, Ashini's letters became an important source that described concrete episodes of Shinran's life. This dispelled doubt about Shinran's historical existence. The kind of reverence she professed for Shinran became the underlying rationale for the Honganji's existence. Ashini's letters are exceptional additionally because they were written by a woman of the provinces. Most writings during the medieval period were written by men. Religious writings by men tended to be idealized descriptions of doctrinal literature, and I do think similar to Shinran's writings. Ashini's writings give an accessible view of what life and the practice of Pure Land religion was like in medieval Japan. This is her daughter, Kakushini. As you see, she's also dressed in a way that would symbolize a nun. As an adult, Kakushini became a resourceful woman like her mother. She married, but her first husband died a short time afterwards. It is clear from her mother's letters that they maintain a close relationship, although separated by distance. It is probably for this reason that Kakushini kept her mother's letters. Kakushini took care of her father Shinran until he passed away. After her father's death, she married again. This union is important because her husband owned land and supported her plan to establish a gravesite chapel to memorialize Shinran. He provided the land on which to build the chapel. The chapel was completed using donations from many of Shinran's followers. A statue of Shinran was enshrined inside of its altar. When her husband died, he bequeathed the land to Kakushini. Kakushini broke with the tradition of patrilineal inheritance and did not leave the land to her son. She placed the land in the name of Shinran's followers in the countryside. It became a sacred site belonging to the faithful rather than to her family alone. Dobbins writes, this act demonstrates the independence that some women enjoyed to dispose of their inheritance as they chose. Kakushini was thus the de facto founder of the Nishi Honganji, the Jodo Shinshu Mother Temple that still stands in Kyoto today. Dobbins continues, early on, it was possible for a woman to assume a position of prime authority. Kakushini is the foremost example. Even 2 generations later, it was not unthinkable for a woman to become head of the Honganji. For in 1339, Kakunyo, Ashini's great-grandson, designated his wife to be his successor in an official letter naming his religious heir. Unfortunately, she died before he did and thus never assumed the office. After that, both the Honganji and the Shinshu institutions followed a pattern of patrilocal organization and patrilineal succession almost invariably. Men emerged as the recognized leaders and decision makers of the Shinshu. And women, although active in the background, were subordinated. In short, the Shinshu came to mirror the patriarchal values that dominated Japan from late medieval times on. As I have mentioned, the accession of the new Manchu, who replaced his retiring father, was held at the Honganji in Kyoto 2 years ago. There is currently no lineage change on the horizon in Japan. However, we can optimistically turn our vision to Buddhist Churches of America's leadership. Will there be a woman bishop in the foreseeable future? From posing this question to some BCA senseis with decision-making power, I get the answer that there is a likelihood of this happening. Time will tell. It is promising that the number of women who are practicing as Shin Buddhist ministers is increasing. Additionally, women make up the largest group in the Ministerial Assistance Program, which is a path for many who aspire to be future ministers. Vista Buddhist Temple, as you well know, is being represented by 3 women. In closing, okay, all right, you told me what I could do. Okay, that's what I want to do. Okay, in closing, I would like to read a poem written by, oh yeah, it's there, Lady Takeko Kujo, from her book, Leaves of My Heart. You heard about this book from Sensei Ron Tabor last Sunday, and so I'm not going to go into detail about the book, but I want to read a poem from this book that fits very well with my theme of women in history, particularly Buddhist history. The title of the poem is called Indulging in Sympathy. Women are considered to be weak. For that reason, they receive a lot of sympathy from men. But those who champion the cause of women in society commonly err when they assume that women are, by nature, the weaker sex. Originally, women were never pitifully weak. The irrational sympathy that men have for women is a kind of seduction. Women must remember to stand proud and strong in the face of this. So in closing, may we bow in gratitude to the women of the past, women of the present, the women of the future, for their contribution not only to Buddhism, but to our world. May we bow in gratitude to all women in our Buddhist lineage, past, present, and future. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.